I sat there motionless, the stem of my water glass chilled against my palm as the ballroom burst into brittle laughter. The chandeliers sparkled like they were in on the joke. She never did anything but drink coffee and file forms. That was the punchline. My name, his target. 30 years of work, erased in one toast. Across the linen-covered table, no one met my eyes. Not even my son's godmother. Not even Dana. I smiled, small and steady. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I had the proof. And he'd forgotten I kept everything. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The chandeliers in the hotel ballroom threw golden halos over the linen-draped tables, casting soft shadows across polished silverware and neatly folded place cards. Waiters glided between conversations, topping off wine glasses and clearing half-eaten salmon on trays. A string quartet played something forgettable in the corner. Laughter bubbled sporadically from different corners of the room, old co-workers catching up, half-heartedly pretending the decades hadn't gone by. Carolyn Hayes sat 2 seats from the end of table 4, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. The navy blue silk of her blouse matched the quiet confidence she'd practiced in the mirror that morning, but now her shoulders felt heavier than they had in years. She'd spent 3 decades in this company, hundreds of late nights, projects salvaged, budgets balanced to the cent. And yet, as the evening dragged on, her name hadn't been mentioned once. Then, from the far side of the room, Martin Blake clinked his glass with a butter knife. The clang cut through the din like a bell. Conversations hushed. Forks froze mid-air. Every eye turned toward him. He stood near the dais, a red wine flush blooming across his cheeks. His tie hung askew, half loosened in the southern humidity that clung to even the air-conditioned space. Dana, his daughter, hovered behind him, her smile thin, her hand lightly gripping his elbow. She seemed to already sense what was coming. Martin raised his glass, his voice booming louder than it needed to be. To old friends, long nights, and making miracles happen under budget. Polite laughter fluttered. And let's not forget the real stars of the show, he said, turning slowly to sweep his gaze over the room. People like me, who had to herd cats and clean up messes and, he smirked, deal with folks like Carolyn, who, let's be honest, never did anything around here except drink coffee and file forms. A beat of stunned silence, then laughter, uneasy at first, then louder from the tables that always followed Martin's lead. Someone snorted. Someone else coughed to cover a chuckle. But mostly it was the laughter of people who didn't want to pick a side. Easier to laugh than to object. Carolyn's spine stiffened. Her breath hitched once, like a punch had landed too low to see. She glanced down quickly, letting her hair fall just enough to shield her expression. She tasted metal at the back of her tongue. Louise Turner, seated to her right, leaned over under the pretense of adjusting her napkin. Her hand found Carolyn's beneath the table and gave it a firm, quiet squeeze. It was the only anchor in a room that had suddenly turned liquid and unstable. Carolyn didn't speak. She didn't turn to look at Martin. Instead, she reached for her water glass with a steady hand, the condensation cooling her fingertips. She took a slow sip and placed the glass back down, perfectly aligned with the knife beside it. She smiled, not big, not showy. Just enough for anyone watching to see composure where there should have been fury. Across the room, Dana's eyes darted toward her, lips pressed into a straight line. If she'd had any hope of rehabilitating her father's image tonight, Martin had just shattered it in one sloppy toast. Louise leaned in and murmured, "You okay?" Carolyn nodded once. "Peachy." Her voice didn't crack. Her hands didn't shake. Martin had always counted on people staying silent. on time washing over truths until no one remembered what was real. But Carolyn remembered everything, every memo she'd written, every budget she'd saved, every project she'd resurrected from chaos. And now, her silence wasn't fear, it was the sound of strategy. Louise leaned back in her chair, catching Carolyn's eye with a knowing glance. There was something electric in it, a shift in the air. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne flutes. Carolyn declined with a polite shake of her head. Martin had returned to his seat, basking in the aftermath of his jab, chuckling as if he'd just told the funniest story of the night. Carolyn didn't watch him. She looked instead at her cloth napkin, folded neatly in her lap, then let her gaze drift to the exit doors. A new thought was forming, not vengeance, not rage, a plan. And it started with the cabinet at home, the one he'd forgotten about, the one she hadn't. The door clicked shut behind Carolyn with a soft thud, muffled by the thick September air that clung even at night. Her townhouse near Decatur was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that felt curated, by intention, not accident. She kicked off her heels by the entryway, set her purse on the console table, and stood for a long moment in the darkened foyer, listening, not for noise, for the weight of what she was about to do. A soft creak of the floorboard followed her as she made her way down the hallway, turning left into the study. The room smelled faintly of cedar and lemon oil, clean, preserved. She hadn't spent much time in here lately. Retirement had shifted her routines. Gardening in the mornings, long walks after lunch, coffee with Louise on Wednesdays. But the study? The study was still sacred. She reached for the lamp and turned it on. Warm light spilled across the room, illuminating the wall of built-in bookshelves, the framed awards gathering light dust, and the tall locked cabinet in the corner. Sleek, gray steel, industrial, a remnant from her final year in the company. She crouched to retrieve the key from the lower drawer of the desk, tucked behind a decades-old stapler and a cracked leather Rolodex. The key was small, cold, and slightly stiff in the lock, but it turned with a soft click that echoed louder than it should have. The door creaked open, and there they were. 13 thick binders lined up in a row, their spines neatly labeled by fiscal year and project code. Budget analyses, resource plans, launch schedules, post-mortems that Martin used to pretend never existed. She reached out and ran her fingers across the vinyl edges, some faded with age, others still sharp, corners pristine. Her initials, CH, marked the footers of hundreds of pages inside. The binders smelled faintly of paper and permanence. Below them, in 2 neat stacks, sat folders of press releases, magazine features, and local business journal clippings. Headlines with her name, bold and unmistakable. Hayes leads landmark rollout ahead of schedule. Carolyn Hayes, the quiet force behind Blake Tech's turnaround. Project Vision, from chaos to control. She pulled out one of the binders, Year 22, Project Links, and opened to the contract summary page. Her signature stared back at her in blue ink, confident and clean. Martin's name was there too, in the lower corner, but only as an approver. Not the author, not the lead, not the mind behind the operation. She turned another page, then another. Not out of doubt, but ceremony. Like flipping through a photo album from a war only she remembered fighting. A breath she hadn't realized she was holding slipped free from her chest. She rose slowly, binder still in hand, and walked to the desk. The house was still silent. No TV murmuring in the background, no music humming from a speaker. Just the slow, solid rhythm of her own heartbeat rising. She picked up the landline, another relic, and pressed 1. Louise. The line rang twice. "Hello," Louise answered, her voice scratchy, low with sleep, but instantly alert. Carolyn didn't hesitate. I still have everything. There was a pause on the other end, then a sharp inhale. Well, Louise said softly, isn't that something? Carolyn didn't answer. She set the binder on the desk, then laid her palm over it like one might a headstone, a hand-carved marker of a truth someone tried to bury. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was electric. You ready? Louise asked, voice steady now. Carolyn looked out the window. Across the dark lawn, the streetlight flickered, as if winking at her. Almost, she said. She hung up the phone and turned back to the cabinet. One by one, she began pulling binders out, setting them on the desk in a precise, deliberate row. The weight of them didn't strain her arms. Not tonight. Halfway through the stack, she paused. A slim manila folder had slipped between two binders, one she hadn't seen in years. She opened it. Inside, stapled together with a rusted clip, was an internal memo. Her handwriting filled the margins in red ink. Martin's name was at the top. But the signature at the bottom? Not his. It was someone else entirely. Someone she hadn't thought about in a long, long time. The bell above the door chimed as Carolyn stepped into Jasper's Diner, a tucked-away spot off Scott Boulevard, where the booth still had teal leather cushions and the waitresses called you Han. It smelled like bacon grease and old coffee, unapologetically nostalgic. She hadn't been here in at least 5 years, but the place hadn't aged a day. Neither had Louise Turner, apparently. Still got that church secretary hair, Carolyn teased as she slid into the booth across from her friend. Louise grinned, tapping her iced tea with one finger. And you still dress like a catalog ad for retired, but not done yet. Sit your legacy down. Carolyn managed a small laugh, but her smile faded quickly. Sleep had been scarce last night. The memo, the signature that didn't belong, had sat like a stone in her chest, raising more questions than answers. She'd almost brought it with her but stopped herself. Not yet. Not here. A waitress in a flannel apron stopped by. Carolyn ordered black coffee. Louise added a slice of lemon pie to her half-eaten tuna melt and waved her off. So, Louise said, folding her napkin in half like she was about to take a deposition. You still processing, or are we officially into planning mode? Carolyn glanced out the window. The sky was a dull slate, clouds threatening rain. Bit of both. Louise leaned in. Talk to me. They traded stories over coffee and pie crumbs, projects from 15-20 years ago, the time they'd pulled off a product launch in 3 weeks flat after Martin disappeared on a golf retreat. The vendor disaster in '07. The energy efficiency overhaul Carolyn designed from scratch that got them that state grant. Louise tapped her fork against her plate. You carried half the company on your back, and we all knew it. Hell, Martin knew it. He just hated that it was you. Carolyn exhaled sharply through her nose. Doesn't matter what we knew. The public only remembers what gets repeated. His version stuck. Mine didn't. Louise's brow furrowed. Don't give me that. You've got proof now. Actual documentation, right? That cabinet of yours full of binders like an IRS bunker? Carolyn nodded slowly. I went through them last night. Still organized. Still solid. And? She hesitated. There was something else, too. An old memo. Martin's name on it, but not his signature at the bottom. Louise leaned forward, interest piqued. Whose signature? I don't know yet. The name's familiar, but it's buried deep. I'll dig it out later. Louise sat back, thoughtful. Well, either way, we've got ammunition. And if we're playing this game, Carolyn, you don't come in empty-handed. Not anymore. Carolyn studied her friend's face. Worn but sharp, eyes still alert. Louise had always known how to sniff out lies, cover-ups, half-truths, wrapped in corporate jargon. She was the one person from those years who had never once made her feel small. I'm not sure people care, Carolyn said softly. It's been so long. Martin's got his story polished. His daughter's doing PR for him now. That machine runs deep. Louise's eyes flashed. You're right. People don't care. Not until you make them. Carolyn stirred her coffee. It's a risk. So's letting a man like him rewrite your life. A long pause followed, filled only by the clatter of dishes and a toddler whining in a nearby booth. Finally, Carolyn reached into her purse and pulled out a slim folder. Just one. This is Link's. Year 22. I highlighted the original contract specs. Louise flipped it open immediately, her lips tightening into a thin line. God, I forgot how good your reports were. This could have run the Pentagon. Carolyn offered a half smile. Only ran a failing tech division. Same thing, Louise muttered, flipping pages. Then she looked up. You need to show this. Publicly. If not to the world, then at least to the right people. I'll help. Carolyn's jaw flexed, but she nodded. All right, she said. But we do this smart. No drama, no shouting. No, Louise agreed, just precision. The bell over the door rang again. Carolyn glanced up instinctively, and froze. A familiar face had just walked in. Older now, grayer, but unmistakable. The signature on that memo? It belonged to him. Rain slicked the sidewalks downtown as Carolyn crossed Peachtree Street with a leather satchel pressed tight to her side. The weight of the binders inside wasn't just physical. It was decades of nights spent under fluorescent light, of every time she'd been told to be a team player, while her name was quietly erased. Gerald Price's office sat on the 12th floor of a narrow brick building wedged between a bank and a boutique law firm. The lobby smelled of lemon cleaner and old marble. She signed in, rode the elevator up, and stepped out into a quiet hallway lined with black and white photos of Atlanta's skyline from the 70s. It felt like stepping into a time capsule, appropriate, she thought, for what she was carrying. The receptionist, a young man in a navy sweater vest, glanced at the satchel. Ms. Hayes, Mr. Price is ready for you. She nodded, smoothing the front of her coat, and followed him into an office framed by floor-to-ceiling windows. Gerald Price rose from behind a mahogany desk, extending a hand. He was tall, trim, with steel gray hair combed back, and a suit that spoke of understated authority. His handshake was firm, but not performative. Ms. Hayes, he said, voice low and measured. Please, have a seat. I understand you've brought material. She set the satchel down on the table between them and unzipped it slowly, the sound like a zipper on a body bag. Out came binder after binder, stacked neatly until they formed a fortress of vinyl and paper. She hesitated before sliding the slim manila folder, the one with the mysterious signature, to the side. Gerald adjusted his glasses and began flipping pages of the first binder. His brow lifted slightly. He turned another, then another. These are internal budgets, he murmured, detailed Gantt charts, resource allocations, contingency plans. He looked up at her. You wrote all of these? Yes, Carolyn said simply. Every line, every projection. He just signed off. Gerald tapped a finger on Martin's name in the lower corner of a contract. Your initials are in the footers. His only show up as an approver. That's significant. He opened the manila folder, scanning the old memo. And this isn't Martin's signature at all. His eyes narrowed. This belongs to someone in legal, doesn't it? Someone who certified these contracts. Carolyn crossed her legs, hands folded on her knee to keep them from trembling. I thought so. I couldn't remember the name until last night, but when I saw him walk into the diner, she trailed off, letting the implication hang. Gerald closed the folder gently. That's leverage. More than leverage. This is a pattern. If Martin publicly claimed your work as his while knowingly signing off with another attorney's certification, you have grounds for defamation, and possibly even a claim for damages tied to lost opportunities. He slid the binder back toward her and leaned forward. "You've been slandered, Ms. Hayes, in writing, in public remarks. You have hard evidence to prove otherwise. That changes the game." Outside, a thunderclap rolled over the city, rattling the window glass. Carolyn looked down at the papers, her handwriting, her careful diagrams, her signature as crisp as the day she wrote it. For so long she'd been told she was support staff, back office, not client-facing. Yet here sat the proof that she had built the backbone of the company. "What happens next?" she asked, her voice steady but low. Gerald smiled faintly. "We draft a demand letter. We control the narrative before he does. If he refuses to retract, we escalate. You're not powerless anymore, Ms. Hayes." Her throat felt tight but not with fear. It was something closer to relief, but sharper, like the first deep breath after surfacing from a long dive. "I'm ready," she said. Gerald slid a legal pad across the desk and clicked a pen. "Good. Start by listing every project where your authorship can be documented. We'll cross-reference with his public statements. This won't just be about vindication. It's about setting the record straight." She picked up the pen and began to write, the tip scratching quietly against the paper as rain streaked down the windows. One by one, she wrote the project names, the years, the budgets. Each line felt like reclaiming a brick from a house he'd stolen. Halfway through the list, Gerald's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "Interesting." "What is it?" Carolyn asked. He turned the screen toward her. A news alert glowed across it. "Martin Blake to be honored at private luncheon this Friday." "A career of innovation." Gerald's eyes met hers. "Looks like he's going to stand in front of another crowd." Carolyn tightened her grip on the pen, ink smudging slightly under her fingers. "Then," she said quietly, "so will I." The ballroom at the Buckhead Grand Hotel glittered brighter than the reunion had. This was no nostalgia night. It was a coronation. Gold-accented place settings and centerpieces of white lilies turned the luncheon into a staged photograph. The placard at the podium read, "A Career of Innovation, honoring Martin Blake." Carolyn Hayes sat 2 tables back, angled toward the dais. A heavy cream-colored folder rested inside her leather tote beneath the tablecloth, its edges worn soft from the night she and Gerald spent duplicating the key pages. Her pulse thudded under her ribs with each laugh from the front of the room. Martin Blake stood at the microphone, basking in applause. The lights caught the silver in his hair and made it look deliberate, like a badge of experience. Dana hovered near the edge of the stage, smartphone poised, recording everything. Thank you," Martin boomed, his voice amplified and too smooth. "When I started at Blake Tech, we were a scrappy little outfit with a handful of contracts. I built the infrastructure. I managed the rollouts. I kept our budgets under control. And look where we ended up." A ripple of polite claps. Louise Turner sat to Carolyn's right, her posture casual but her foot tapping steadily under the table. She leaned in, whispering, "He's writing your history out loud." Carolyn kept her gaze on her napkin. "I know." Martin raised a hand for quiet, smiling like a man receiving absolution. "Some people say innovation is a team sport. I say you can't win without a good coach. And I—" He paused for effect. "Was that coach?" Laughter. Louise's hand brushed Carolyn's under the table, a signal they'd agreed on. "Now," she murmured, just a breath of sound. Carolyn's heart thumped once, hard. Then she reached for her bag. The zipper whispered open. She drew out the folder and set it on the table, its presence a quiet bomb between the water glasses and breadbasket. She slid it across to Martin's table like a poker player laying down a final hand. The room's chatter dulled as if on cue. Dana's camera dipped slightly. Martin, mid-sentence, looked down at the folder now sitting in front of him, his name typed neatly on the top page of each report. but only as an approver. His brow knit. "What's this?" he asked, voice still amplified, though thinner now. "Read it," Carolyn said softly but firmly enough that it carried to the first few tables. Martin flipped the first page, then another. The microphone picked up the faint shuffle of paper. His face shifted. Bemusement, then irritation, then something harder to disguise. These are old project files," he said finally, his attempt at a chuckle sounding brittle. "Outdated paperwork. We're here to celebrate, not dredge up that paperwork." Gerald Price's voice cut in, smooth as a blade. "Documents exactly who authored the budgets and plans you've been taking credit for." Heads turned. Gerald rose from his seat at the back and walked toward the stage with the easy gait of a man who'd done this before. His tailored navy suit caught the light as he reached the podium. "I'm Gerald Price, counsel for Ms. Hayes. I can verify the authenticity of every page." A murmur rolled through the crowd like a tide pulling back from shore. Martin's jaw worked, but no sound came. Dana lowered her phone completely, color draining from her cheeks. Louise sat straighter, her lips twitching at the edges. "God, I've waited for this," she whispered to Carolyn. Carolyn kept her eyes on Martin, not gloating, just steady. "We're not here to celebrate lies," she said quietly, but again her voice carried farther than she expected. "We're here to tell the truth." Martin's fingers tightened around the edge of the folder. "This is ridiculous," he barked finally. "Nobody cares about dusty files from 20 years ago. They remember results." "Exactly," Gerald said, his tone still calm. "And these documents show who produced them." The MC at the side of the room tried to interject, but the crowd's low buzz was rising, some guests craning for a look at the reports. One of Martin's former VPs whispered something into another's ear. For the first time, Martin looked small behind the podium, the stage lights casting sharp lines across his face. Carolyn folded her napkin and placed it neatly beside her plate. Her hands didn't shake. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was anticipatory. Dana stepped forward as if to rescue her father, but hesitated, glancing at Gerald, then at Carolyn. Something like recognition flickered in her eyes. Martin snapped the folder shut and leaned toward the microphone. This is a misunderstanding." Gerald raised a finger slightly. "We're not finished." Carolyn sat back, her pulse steady now. She'd walked into this room with truth in her bag. Now it was on the table, in Martin's hands, in front of everyone. And Gerald had only just begun. The fallout didn't come with a bang. It came with a ding. The first email hit Carolyn's inbox the next morning at 6:42 a.m. from an address she didn't recognize until she opened it. Doug Myers, former IT systems analyst, 3 cubicles down from her back in row 8. Subject, about last night, Carolyn. "I always knew the numbers never added up the way Martin told them. Wish I'd said something back then. You handled it with grace." Doug. By 9:00 a.m., there were 7 more. Some short and tentative. "Didn't know you'd been the engine behind Lynx. Impressive work." Others bolder. "Finally, we all saw what he did." Carolyn scrolled through them at her kitchen island, coffee in hand, half waiting for one message to sting or spin it all as drama. But it never came. Instead, her phone lit up with a call from Louise. "Your legend just got real legs," Louise said by way of greeting. "They're buzzing. Even Janice the Journal is asking for a quote." Carolyn chuckled. "Let her wait. I'm not doing press releases." "You should see the Facebook group," Louise said, chewing something on the other end, probably a Pop-Tart. Martin's face looks like a chewed eraser. Someone posted a clip of him fumbling at the podium. Gerald looks like he just walked off a courtroom TV show. Carolyn refreshed her inbox. Another message popped up. Subject: "I knew it was you all along. Remember North Point?" She read it with a kind of detachment, like skimming through an old photo album. Each name was a piece of her past life folding itself back into shape. By noon, Gerald called. "Everything on your end holding?" Carolyn took a sip of her second coffee. "Louder than I expected." "Good. That means it landed. I've received zero legal pushback from Martin's side, which tells me they're trying to get their story straight. But we've got timestamps, signatures, third-party witnesses. Your case is airtight. And by the time they blink, this will already be public record." She didn't speak right away. She just watched the condensation slide down her glass. Gerald waited. He had that kind of silence that didn't press, just held space. "It's not just about the work," she finally said. "It's about being erased." That's what stayed with me all these years. Not being overlooked, rewritten. "I know," he said, "but you rewrote it back." After they hung up, Carolyn opened the glass doors to her small back patio. It had rained in the night, and the terracotta pots lining her garden wall were still beaded with droplets. She stepped outside barefoot, letting the dampness ground her. The air was clean. Behind her, the home phone rang. She let it go to voicemail. Inside the machine's tinny speaker, Martin's voice sputtered out, "Carolyn, you made your point. But that folder, it's not the whole story. You're twisting things. I won't let this... Look, call me back." Beep. She closed the door. He still thought he could steer the narrative, that he could manipulate context like he always had in boardrooms and quarterly recaps. But this time, the evidence didn't leave space for spin. She walked back to her study, opened the drawer, and removed a thin manila envelope Gerald had left with her. Inside were copies of the original contracts, plus a preliminary statement drafted for internal distribution at Blake Tech if it came to that. Her eyes skimmed the heading, "Clarification of project ownership and historical records" below. Her name appeared 4 times before Martin's ever did. As she returned the papers to the drawer, her phone vibrated again. This time, a text from Dana Blake. "We need to talk." Carolyn stared at the screen. No greeting, no apology, just a 4-word plea from a daughter caught between loyalty and reality. She set the phone down. Didn't respond. Not yet. Across the city, Martin Blake sat fuming in his midtown condo. Calls unanswered. Emails piling. An invitation rescinded that morning from a corporate roundtable he used to keynote every year. And for the first time since his retirement, he had no meeting to run. Carolyn sat at her kitchen table, the hum of the dishwasher low and rhythmic behind her. The morning sun cut through the blinds, striping her laptop screen with soft gold. She pushed her glasses up her nose and clicked refresh. The post was still there. Dana Blake PR 8 hours ago. "Hard to watch people distort a man's life's work. If you think you know the full story, ask yourself, who really kept things running? Some folks are louder now than they ever were back then." Legacy. Truth matters. It had racked up over 200 likes and a string of comments, mostly from the usual suspects: PR contacts, corporate peers, vague sympathizers. But underneath, the tone was shifting. Carolyn read slowly, letting the replies speak louder than Dana's hashtags ever could. Ann Norma Hartley. "I worked with Carolyn Hayes on North Point. She was the engine. Martin was barely involved." Data Chaz ATL. "Funny how the loud ones are the ones who finally got tired of being erased." ANIT Grady. "Got receipts or just spin, Dana? Because I've seen the binders." Carolyn didn't click the like button, didn't reply, just sipped her tea and scrolled. Her phone buzzed. Another group text from a thread Louise had titled "The Comeback Tour." It was mostly old co-workers, people Carolyn hadn't spoken to in years. But now, they chimed in like neighbors who'd watched the same fire and finally agreed it wasn't an accident. Louise. "Dana's trying to spin her dad into a misunderstood genius. It's adorable. Marcia. He told people I was his assistant. I had a whole department. I'm still mad. Ben W. Carolyn, if you ever go public with the archive, I'll write the foreword. She chuckled but didn't respond. Instead, she opened a new tab and typed in Blake Tech's internal alumni portal. There, in the tucked-away Recognition and Milestones section, someone had posted a scanned copy of the original Link's project launch sheet. Her name, top left. Project owner, Carolyn Hayes. Approval, M. Blake, secondary. Below it was a caption. History doesn't always get it right. Sometimes you have to help it remember. She leaned back in her chair. No fanfare, no headlines, just the slow, patient arc of truth bending back toward her. From the hallway, the front door creaked open. Back with caffeine, Louise called out. She entered holding 2 cups from the corner shop. And 2 muffins. Because vindication burns calories, apparently. Carolyn accepted her cup, still looking at the screen. Dana's making noise. Martin must have had her working overnight. Louise sat down across from her. And you're not responding? Nope. Louise raised her brows. That might drive them crazier than anything else. Carolyn smiled. That's the point. Louise took a sip, nodding in approval. Let the silence sting. A soft ping interrupted them. An email. Carolyn clicked it open. Gerald. Subject. Updated filing. Carolyn. Attached is the amended brief with the new signature verification from the archive witness. It'll be logged by 3 p.m. Still no word from Martin's side. Radio silence usually means panic. G. She downloaded the PDF, her eyes skimming the legalese until they hit her own name, now formally tied to every major deliverable in the Blake Tech archives from 2002 to 2011. Gerald sent the filing, she said, voice low but firm. Louise leaned over. That's beautiful. Carolyn minimized the window and set the laptop aside. She stood, stretching, letting the morning light warm her shoulders. The fight had always seemed like it would need fire and noise, but it hadn't. It had needed evidence, and patience, and the right moment. Outside, a dog barked in the neighbor's yard. A bird landed on the porch railing. Then her phone buzzed again. Another post. This one from Dana, but different. No hashtags, no PR lingo. Dana Blake. Dana Blake PR. There are things I didn't know, things I should have. Silence isn't always absence, it's dignity. I hear you now. Carolyn stared at the screen for a long moment. Louise read it over her shoulder. Well, that's new. But Carolyn didn't respond. Not yet. Not to Dana. Not to anyone. She returned to her desk, opened a fresh legal pad, and began to write. Dates, names, meetings. There were still more threads to tie off, and one of them led straight to the archives. The voicemail sat in her inbox like a ticking watch. No blinking light, no flashing warning, just the quiet presence of a man who used to command rooms and now couldn't even control his own narrative. Carolyn stood in the center of her study, holding the landline handset in one hand, the receiver barely an inch from her ear. She pressed 7, and Martin's voice bled into the room again. Carolyn, come on now. This isn't how we settle things. We've both said our piece. Haven't we? You got your little moment? Fine. But if you think dragging my name through the mud is going to help your legacy, you're mistaken. You still have time to walk this back. Don't make me do what I don't want to do. Click. She didn't flinch. Not this time. From the hallway, Louise appeared, mug in one hand, reading glasses pushed halfway up her forehead. That the same message from yesterday? Carolyn nodded. Third time I've listened to it. Just wanted to be sure I wasn't overreading the threat. Louise gave a dry little snort. There's no overreading that. He basically said, nice legacy you got there. Shame if something happened to it. Carolyn hit 9 to save the message, then set the receiver down in its cradle. He thinks this is still a negotiation. It's not, Louise said, settling into the armchair opposite her. He lost the leverage the moment you brought receipts. She sipped her coffee. But you already knew that. Carolyn crossed to her desk, opened her laptop, and dragged the voicemail audio into a folder labeled Legal, Martin B. Then she typed out a quick note and forwarded the file to Gerald. 5 minutes later, her email pinged. Subject: voicemail. Actionable. Yep. This counts as soft intimidation. I'll be drafting a formal response for his counsel today. Do not reply to him. Let him sweat. Carolyn leaned back in her chair, watching the cursor blink like a heartbeat. Across from her, Louise pulled a skein of yarn from her tote bag. You want to talk, or you want to knit? Carolyn raised a brow. Is that even a question? Louise tossed her the spare set of needles. Carolyn caught them mid-air, muscle memory sliding back into place. For the next half hour, they knitted in silence. The soft click-click of needles filled the room like a metronome for their breathing. It wasn't about the stitches. It never was. It was about rhythm, stability, focus. Martin's unraveling, Louise said without looking up. And Dana's trying to patch him together with hashtags and grace. But it's not enough. He knows it. That voicemail reeked of desperation. Carolyn's hands moved steadily, casting on another row. He can panic all he wants. I'm not picking up the phone. Outside, the wind stirred the garden. Leaves fluttered against the windows like soft applause. Louise reached for her mug and pointed at Carolyn's inbox with the handle. When's Gerald sending the letter? He said before the close of business. And then? Carolyn smiled faintly. Then it's his turn to answer questions. Louise gave a small nod. Good. Let the man finally manage something he can't spin. The mood in the room had shifted. Still quiet, but charged. Carolyn felt it down to her core. Martin was used to being on top, using pressure and charm like dual weapons. But now his voice was just another MP3 in a labeled folder. Time-stamped and backed up to the cloud. He had built a career on controlling perception. But this call? This time? He'd made a mistake. At 4:17 p.m., another email landed. Subject: letter delivered, no response. Yet. The intimidation voicemail is now logged with a timestamp, witness transcript, and context. We'll wait, but I expect either a denial or a very carefully worded excuse from their legal side. Stand firm. You're not alone in this. Gerald Carolyn read it twice, then closed the laptop and returned to her knitting. Her hands moved a little faster now. I'm not alone, she repeated under her breath, not to reassure herself, just to mark the moment. Her phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. Check the Blake Tech alumni page. New comment on your project listing. Carolyn set the yarn aside and reached for her laptop. Whatever it was, it hadn't come from her. The Blake Tech Alumni Auditorium hummed like a beehive, low, electric, restless. Rows of padded chairs angled toward a long oak table at the front, where Martin Blake sat flanked by two stone-faced attorneys. A blue banner above read, Annual Alumni Transparency Forum. Irony thick as varnish. Carolyn entered with Gerald at her side, a slim portfolio under his arm, her own folder clasped like a talisman. She felt every eye turn toward them. Some faces she recognized from old projects. Others were new, but curious. Martin spotted her immediately. His jaw flexed, and he gripped the edge of the table as though it could anchor him. Dana sat a few seats away, tablet in hand, her posture taut but unsure. The moderator adjusted his mic. Mr. Blake, Ms. Hayes, thank you for joining us to clarify the record. She's lying. Martin's voice cracked across the room before the moderator could finish. This whole circus is based on misinterpreted paperwork and ancient grudges. I won't stand for it. A gasp rippled through the audience. Phones tilted up, recording. Carolyn stayed seated, calm as stone. Gerald rose slowly, unhurried. "If we could maintain decorum," he said evenly, "we can all see the evidence." He opened the portfolio and slid a stack of certified documents onto the table in front of Martin. The pages whispered like dry leaves as they spread. "These are contracts, budgets, project charters, everyone signed by Ms. Hayes as author and lead. Mr. Blake's name appears only as secondary approver." Martin shoved the stack back. "Out of context." Gerald didn't blink. He turned to the moderator. "With permission, I've brought a witness from the corporate archives who can speak to the original records." From the back of the room, a woman in a tailored gray dress rose. Sandra Lewis, archival clerk, keeper of the company's long memory. Her silver hair was pulled into a tight bun, her badge swinging as she walked down the aisle with steady steps. "I'm Sandra Lewis," she said into the microphone, her voice clear but not loud. "I've been responsible for Blake Tech's records retention for 30 years. I personally oversaw the digitization of the Lynx, North Point, and Summit project archives." She placed a thumb drive on the table. "This contains the unaltered originals. Every single one lists Carolyn Hayes as project lead. Mr. Blake's signature appears only in the approval box." Murmurs swelled across the auditorium. A man in the third row whispered, "I knew it." Not as gossip, but as confession. Martin's color deepened. This is some plot. She's manipulating you." Sandra didn't flinch. "The metadata is locked. Timestamps, authorship fields, and internal memos all corroborate Ms. Hayes's authorship." She glanced at Carolyn, then back at Martin. "There's nothing to manipulate." Gerald spoke again, his voice calm but edged. "Mr. Blake, defamation is not merely a word, it's a legal claim. You made repeated public statements minimizing Ms. Hayes's contributions while implying she was nothing but clerical support. You did so while records under your control proved otherwise. That is actionable under Georgia law." More murmurs. Someone hissed. Dana lowered her tablet to her lap, her hands twisting in her lap. Martin stood abruptly, knocking his chair back with a screech. "You can't do this. You think you can drag me into some kangaroo court?" Gerald adjusted his glasses. "This isn't court, yet. But you're under oath to tell the truth in this forum, and everything said here is on record." The moderator cleared his throat, clearly rattled. "Mr. Blake, please." "I built this company," Martin shouted, voice cracking again. "I was the one." Gerald slid a final page forward, a printed screen capture of the alumni portal where the scanned launch sheets had gone viral overnight. "And yet," he said softly, "history remembers what's documented." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Phones stopped moving. Even the air seemed to tighten. Martin's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Just a soundless sputter. His fingers drummed the tabletop, seeking some rhythm, some line to throw back. But none came. Carolyn sat perfectly still, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. Not triumph, not anger, just the quiet certainty of someone whose story had finally walked out into daylight. Beside her, Gerald closed the portfolio with a soft snap. "We'll be filing the full brief Monday morning," he said. At the far edge of the table, Dana's voice rose, tentative. "Dad." Martin turned toward her, his eyes wild, and for the first time the room saw a man cornered, not a titan. The email from Martin's new counsel arrived on Tuesday morning, 2 days after the alumni forum. Subject: pending defamation, claims our client, Mr. Martin Blake, denies all allegations. He maintains his legacy has been misrepresented and reserves the right to pursue legal remedies in response to ongoing reputational harm. Carolyn read it twice, once out of caution, again out of disbelief. Reputational harm, she murmured under her breath, eyes narrowing. Across the table, Gerald stirred his coffee without looking up. It's boilerplate, threat posture, no substance. He glanced over. But let's take the high road and dismantle them line by line anyway. They were back in his downtown office, legal pads stacked between them, files already sorted in a color-coded system Carolyn had grown to appreciate. Gerald worked like a litigator but moved like a surgeon. Quiet hands, precise language, zero drama. Carolyn sat back as he opened his laptop and pulled up the newly drafted response. It was less a defense than a demolition. Itemized references, attached exhibits, sworn declarations from 3 former executives, and archived internal communications backing every project attribution. He hired Fairchild and Abrams, Gerald said with a smirk. Aggressive firm. But sloppy when they think they've got a name brand to defend. Which he doesn't anymore, Carolyn said. Gerald's grin widened slightly. Exactly. They filed their official counterclaim by noon. By evening, the internet had its own ideas. Louise texted screenshots like dispatches from the front lines. Louise. Martin's attorney is trending in the worst way. Louise. Thread just dropped showing Dana liked a dozen posts denying your role after the alumni documents went public. Louise. Also? Someone made a meme of Gerald holding a binder like a Bible. I'm framing it. Carolyn didn't laugh. But she did smile. Not at the drama, at the silence in herself. That old rush of anxiety? Gone? That ache in her stomach? Quiet. She stood at the kitchen sink, watching rain trail down the window. Louise arrived 15 minutes later with warm scones and a thermos of chai. They sat at the kitchen island while the legal filings uploaded to the court's online system. Gerald had given her access to monitor everything, an odd sort of empowerment. Most of the time she didn't check it. Tonight, she did. Gerald's response went in clean, she said, stamped and confirmed. Louise clinked her cup against Carolyn's. Here's to facts with timestamps. Carolyn rolled her eyes but touched mugs anyway. Outside, the rain fell heavier. Inside, the conversation shifted, briefly, to gardening, a neighbor's porch renovation, the pie sale at the church Louise never actually attended. Carolyn listened, grateful for the normalcy. But the moment was short-lived. A buzz from her phone, a notification from the Blake Tech alumni app. Dana Blake, Dana Blake PR. When people rewrite history to serve themselves, we all lose something. Reputation used to be built on results. Now it's all about optics. Louise peeked over her shoulder and groaned. That woman really thinks vague and passive-aggressive counts as damage control? Carolyn locked her phone and set it face down. She's defending a narrative that's already collapsed. Let her. She's trying to draw you into a back and forth, Louise said. Don't bite. I won't, Carolyn replied, already scanning Gerald's emailed court receipt. We don't need to win the internet, just the truth. Across the city, Martin was running out of allies. One of his former board members had removed a LinkedIn endorsement. A panel invitation had been quietly revoked. An article celebrating his legacy of leadership had been pulled from a prominent industry blog without notice. Carolyn hadn't asked for any of it, but it was happening. Not from spite, but from the quiet gravity of facts that refused to stay buried. The last message Gerald sent that night was short. Filing accepted. Discovery window begins Friday. We'll make it swift. He'll be forced to disclose far more than he's prepared for. Carolyn read it twice, then stood and walked to the hall closet. From the top shelf, she pulled down a slim folder she hadn't opened in over a decade. Inside, her original employment agreement, unredacted. Notes scribbled in the margins, and a single clause Martin had inserted himself. Intellectual property rights revert to the project lead upon program retirement. She exhaled slowly, A trap he'd written himself into. The Blake Tech Innovation Panel was live-streamed on a crisp Thursday morning from a Midtown conference center, minus one keynote speaker. The event host made a vague apology about a scheduling issue, but the chat window on the alumni site told the real story. Ellen V. Marketing. Wait, where's Martin? Thought he founded this series? Keish Jarrett, CTO. Pretty sure reputation issues are harder to schedule around than traffic. Hakes Jade K. Finance. Read the filings. Carolyn Hayes wrote half the systems they're talking about. Carolyn watched the stream for less than 5 minutes. Just long enough to see her name referenced, casually but clearly, in the new panel's opening remarks. It's thanks to pioneers like Carolyn Hayes that Blake Tech's project legacy still informs how we work today. She didn't smile. She just took a slow sip of mint tea, legs tucked beneath her in her favorite chair. The jasmine candle on the table burned low. It had rained earlier, and the damp air still lingered outside, curling around the windows like fog. She felt calm. Peace wasn't the loud part of justice. It was the quiet that came after. Louise came by in the afternoon with a bag of groceries she hadn't been asked to bring. Carolyn opened the door to find her friend holding 2 cartons of soup, a fresh baguette, and a bottle of wine tucked under her arm like a hostage. "Is this for sympathy or celebration?" Carolyn asked, arching a brow. "Both," Louise said, breezing inside. "Sympathy for him, celebration for us." She kicked off her shoes, set the groceries on the counter, and grabbed 2 mugs from the cabinet like she owned the place. "I assume you've seen the implosion?" she asked, pouring tea. Carolyn nodded. "His LinkedIn went private yesterday, and someone updated his Wikipedia bio to say he oversaw projects credited largely to Carolyn Hayes." Louise snorted. "Well, he finally got demoted. Took 20 years and a legal filing, but here we are." They settled into the living room, the sun spilling in through the tall windows, glinting off the edge of the polished wooden table where the binders still sat. Closed now, but still present. Symbols of the long, uphill road that had finally curved in Carolyn's favor. "Dana was at the gala last night," Louise said after a beat. "Didn't say a word. Didn't look at anyone directly. Slipped out before dessert." Carolyn didn't gloat. She didn't need to. "She's not the enemy," Carolyn said. "She's just used to holding someone else's story together." "Still," Louise said, "it's hard to glue glass once it's shattered." The phone rang. Carolyn didn't move, just gestured for Louise to pick it up. "Hello?" "Yes, she's here," Louise said, then raised a brow. "Gerald wants to give you a little Friday preview." Carolyn took the call and put it on speaker. "Evening, Carolyn," Gerald said, sounding as crisp and unbothered as always. "Just wanted to share a few updates before you see them in your inbox." "Let's hear it." 1. Martin's legal team filed a motion to pause the proceedings. Judge denied it this afternoon. No delays. Carolyn nodded. "Good." 2. Blake Tech's alumni committee reached out to me directly. They're planning to amend their digital archive with corrected project attributions by next quarter. They want to meet with you to discuss how to present your contributions properly. Louise grinned and mouthed, "Told you so." And 3. Gerald added, "We received confirmation that Martin has officially withdrawn from 3 upcoming tech panels. One of them had him scheduled as a closing speaker." Carolyn felt a pause open in her chest, not empty, but weightless. "He's stepping back." "He's being removed," Gerald corrected. "Quietly, but make no mistake, it's not voluntary." They ended the call shortly after. No chest pounding, no champagne. Just a small nod between friends across the table, tea cooling in their mugs, truth settling into the walls. Louise stood to leave. "If he calls again, let it go to voicemail." "I will." She paused at the door. "You ready for what's next?" Carolyn looked back at the hallway closet. The original employment contract still sat on the shelf. That clause, the one about intellectual property, was about to come due. Gerald had called it a lever, but Carolyn was starting to see it as something else. A key. Gerald's office was quiet when Carolyn stepped in again. No clients in the lobby. No hum of rushed paralegals in the hall. Just the soft tick of a wall clock and the muted rustle of paper from the back. It felt different now. Not like a battlefield. More like a closing ceremony. Gerald looked up from his desk as she entered. Right on time. Carolyn held up the small leather folio she'd been carrying all week. I figured we should make this official before the ink dries anywhere else. He stood and walked around the desk, motioning toward the small conference table. A stack of legal documents lay neatly arranged, with signature tabs sticking out like little yellow flags. This is the final motion regarding damages, Gerald said, sliding the top copy toward her. With the IP clause activated and uncontested, the settlement gives you full creative and ownership rights to everything you built, plus back value damages based on your role. And the donation addendum? She asked, opening the folder. Gerald nodded. Right here, your full allocation, minus fees, directed toward the Future Founders STEM Fund. It'll be used to seed scholarships for women entering systems engineering and project management. Carolyn uncapped the pen, the weight of it heavier than it looked. For a brief moment she paused, because the signature wasn't just about closure, it was about transfer, turning injury into impact. She signed with a steady hand. It's done, she said softly. Not just done, Gerald said. Recorded, acknowledged, and irreversible. The elevator dinged outside. Louise stepped in a moment later, windblown and holding a bouquet of mismatched sunflowers. Tell me I'm not too late for the grand finale. You're just in time, Carolyn said, rising. Louise beamed. I would have brought champagne, but figured that's more Gerald's speed. Gerald smiled. In my office, it's black coffee and clean filings. Louise handed Carolyn the bouquet and pulled her into a hug. You didn't just clear your name, you made a legacy they can't touch. Carolyn hugged her back, tighter than she expected. It wasn't about revenge, Lou. I know, she said, but it still feels good, doesn't it? They left together a few minutes later, stepping into the elevator as Gerald held the door open. Oh, this came for you earlier, he said, handing Carolyn a thin envelope. She opened it in the lobby, sunlight pouring through the glass wall beside her. The paper was thick and cream-colored, the handwriting unmistakable. Dear Ms. Hayes, I wanted to thank you for protecting our records, for honoring the truth, and for reminding the rest of us that accuracy is not just administrative, it's historical. With respect, Sandra Lewis enclosed was a photocopy of the original Lynx project timeline, the one Sandra had referenced at the forum. It was signed by 3 department heads and had Carolyn's name in bold at the top. Underneath, Sandra had scribbled a handwritten note. History remembers what the system records, but people remember who made the system work. Carolyn folded the note carefully and slipped it into her folio. Outside, the sidewalk buzzed with early lunch crowds. As they walked down the steps, a woman paused at the bottom, early 40s, business casual, phone in hand. Ms. Hayes. Carolyn turned. I just wanted to say thank you, the woman said, breath catching slightly. My daughter's a freshman at Georgia Tech, engineering track. She got the email about the new scholarship last night. She couldn't believe someone like you set it up. Carolyn blinked, surprised. I'm glad it's helping someone already. The woman smiled. She said, now I know what legacy should look like. Then she turned and disappeared into the crowd. Louise glanced over. You okay? Carolyn inhaled deeply. The weight she'd carried for years, buried beneath silence, paperwork, and dismissive glances, had been lifted. What remained wasn't emptiness. It was space. "I'm better than okay," she said. "I'm finally unburied." A soft chime rang from her phone. A headline notification slid across the top of the screen. Blake Tech to Restructure Board announces Culture and Credits Initiative. Former project manager's donation cited as catalyst. Carolyn read it once, then again, then locked her phone and slid it into her bag. "This was never his legacy to keep," she said, voice clear. Louise smirked. "Well, let's see how he feels about losing the thing he thought he invented." The call came on a quiet Sunday morning. Carolyn was in the garden, knees deep in the soil behind her townhouse, fingers dusted with compost and marigold pollen. She'd just cut back the basil, and the air smelled sharp and green. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower buzzed to life, but she barely noticed. Her phone rang from the porch table. Unknown caller. She wiped her hands on a towel, walked over slowly, and tapped speaker. "Carolyn?" It was Dana. Her voice sounded different, smaller, thinner. Not the smooth, polished cadence of a woman trained in PR, just human. "I know you don't owe me anything," Dana said, "but I'm asking you to listen." Carolyn didn't reply. "I didn't know," Dana continued. "Not really. I saw my dad in a certain light and I just kept that light on. I thought I was defending him. But I was maintaining a lie, wasn't I?" Carolyn's silence stretched between them like a wire. Dana exhaled. "He's not doing well. He sold the Jaguar last week to cover one of the fee installments. His name's not on the advisory board anymore. The tech summit pulled him. And now he's looking at me like I should fix it." Her voice wavered. "I don't know how to fix it." Still, Carolyn said nothing. "I know he hurt you. I know he tried to take credit for everything. But if there's anything you could do to soften the optics, I don't know. A statement. A line. Something that lets him walk away with dignity." The call crackled. Dana sniffled once. "I just thought maybe the damage could stop here." The line went quiet. Dana was waiting. Hoping. Carolyn reached down and ended the call. She didn't save the voicemail. She didn't text back. She simply turned and walked back into the yard, where the lavender still needed pruning. That night, she met Louise at Jasper's diner. "Toast with me," Louise said, lifting her sweet tea like a champagne flute. "To the world's most elegant annihilation." Carolyn smirked. "You're insufferable." "Damn right, but you're undefeated." They clinked glasses. The same waitress from weeks ago slid Carolyn's order onto the table, grilled cheese and tomato soup, same as always. Louise pulled a folded newsletter from her bag and slid it across the table. "You're page 3. Right after the robotics team from Michigan and before the girl from Boise who built an AI to help her grandma track medication." Carolyn unfolded the paper. There it was. Hayes STEM Fund announces first 5 scholarships awarded. Founder, Carolyn Hayes. Former project manager, Blake Tech. No mention of Martin. No asterisks. Just her name. The truth. She stared at the print for a long moment. "They spelled it right," she said finally. Louise grinned. "Damn right they did." Back at home, the porch light clicked on as she stepped outside. The garden glistened faintly in the moonlight. Rain had fallen while she was gone. Droplets clung to the thyme and curled under the rims of the terracotta pots. Carolyn stepped out barefoot, letting the cool pavers ground her. She knelt and dug her fingers into the dirt again, loosening it with care. Not for work, for peace. The world had gone on. Her name was in a newsletter, her story now public. But the herbs didn't care. The soil didn't know who won. The garden didn't need proof. A breeze rustled through the fence line. She smiled softly to herself. Inside, her phone buzzed again. Bank notification. Incoming wire transfer. Final settlement disbursement posted. Amount redacted. Memo. Case closed, Blake, M. She tapped it once, deleted the notification, and that was that. Martin Blake had built a career on ownership, of systems, of credit, of people. And in the end, he'd lost all of it. The panels, the reputation, the car. And now, finally, the money. Later that night, as she sat on the porch sipping chamomile, Louise sent a final text. Louise. Think he knows you own the systems now. Like legally? Carolyn typed back slowly. Carolyn. He knows. She paused, then added one more line. Carolyn. He just can't do anything about it. It started with a news ticker on the local business channel, half scrolling across the bottom of the screen during an interview Carolyn wasn't even watching. Breaking. Martin Blake files for personal bankruptcy. Sources cite legal losses and reputational fallout from recent IP settlement. She didn't flinch. The morning sun poured into her kitchen, catching the light on the hummingbird feeder outside. Carolyn stood at the sink, watering can in hand, watching a pair of wrens dart between her planters. The basil was thriving again. The lavender had taken root. She hummed a tune she didn't know the name of. Something calm and wordless, almost like a lullaby. Behind her, the kettle began to whistle. She turned off the burner, poured hot water over fresh mint leaves, and walked out to the back porch without a single glance at the television. Some endings didn't need a reaction. Later that afternoon, Louise showed up with a Tupperware tub of oatmeal cookies, a grocery tote slung over her shoulder. Did you hear? She asked, stepping into the kitchen without waiting for permission. It's official. Chapter 11. Carolyn raised an eyebrow. Personal or corporate? Personal. Word is, he's selling the lake house next. Dana's not even listed on the filing. Carolyn didn't answer. She was spooning honey into her tea, slow and steady. Louise set the cookies on the counter, then leaned back against the fridge, studying her. You're really not going to say anything? I said everything I needed to. In court. In filings. In facts. Louise opened the tub and handed her a cookie. He didn't just lose his job or his money. He lost his version of himself. Carolyn broke the cookie in half and took a bite. Maybe now he'll find the honest one. Louise chuckled. Now that's the woman I know. 2 days later, Carolyn received a padded envelope in the mail. No return address. Just her name in tidy script. She opened it slowly, her fingers gentle despite knowing it couldn't be anything threatening anymore. Inside were 2 framed documents. Both were high-quality prints, matted in soft cream with black lacquer frames. One was the original launch sheet from Project Lynx, the other a digitized memo bearing her signature, both pulled from Blake Tech's archival database. A small post-it note was tucked between them. For your study wall. Some things belong where people can see them. Sandra Carolyn traced her name on the glass with one fingertip. Her handwriting, still sharp after all these years. Her role, now finally fixed in ink and image. She didn't cry, not even a little, but she did hang them that same afternoon. By the weekend, news of the bankruptcy had reached national outlets. A tech gossip blog ran a scathing headline, "From Visionary to Vanishing Act, Martin Blake's Collapse, Tied to Forgotten Project Manager." Dana Blake issued a vague statement on LinkedIn about the importance of evolving leadership standards in today's innovation economy. It included no mention of her father. Carolyn read it once, then deleted the tab. She didn't screenshot it. She didn't archive it. She simply let it go, like a leaf riding wind. She spent the rest of the morning trimming her rosemary bush and replanting her chives. Peace was maintenance now. Growth required tending. On Monday, Gerald called one last time. "Everything's closed," he said. "Final payments cleared. Court documents sealed. You're done, Carolyn." She took a breath and nodded, even though he couldn't see her. You sound tired, he added. I'm not tired, she said. Just clear. There was a pause. It was an honor representing you. Likewise, Gerald. Thank you for believing the paper trail mattered. It always matters, he said. Some people just pray, no one ever follows it. That evening, Carolyn sat on her porch, tea in one hand, a cookie in the other. Across the street, a child was riding a scooter, weaving through sidewalk cracks. Wind chimes jingled faintly in the neighbor's yard. She didn't check her phone. She didn't open her laptop. She just sat, surrounded by herbs she'd coaxed back to life, humming that same nameless tune. Inside the house, the framed records caught the golden hour light and shimmered. No spotlight, no applause, just truth. Finally home. Then came the knock. Soft, intentional. Carolyn opened the door and found a man in a dark blazer, holding a leather briefcase and a business card already in hand. Ms. Hayes? He asked. I'm from Clearwater Analytics. We'd like to talk about your systems, specifically licensing. Carolyn blinked once, then smiled, slow, knowing. The ballroom looked different this time. Not because it was redecorated, the chandeliers still hung like gilded halos, and the carpet was still that same deep maroon, but because the air had shifted. Gone was the undercurrent of performance. This year, the Blake Tech Alumni Luncheon buzzed with something warmer, quieter, clearer. When Carolyn stepped through the double doors, heads turned. Not sharply, not theatrically, but subtly, curiously, respectfully. Conversations paused. Glasses hovered mid-pour. It wasn't surprise. Not anymore. It was recognition. She wore slate gray, not black. A simple tailored jacket, pearl earrings, and soft leather shoes that made no sound on the floor. Understated, but firm. The kind of outfit that said, I'm not here for a statement, I am the statement. Louise appeared by her side instantly, beaming. The Queen has arrived. Stop it, Carolyn muttered, though the corners of her mouth tugged upward. Nope, not today. Your front table, baby, and yes, your name is on the program, in 16-point font. Carolyn glanced at the small booklet Louise pressed into her hand. Inside, the words jumped off the page. Keynote honoree Carolyn Hayes, former lead PM, Blake Tech Systems Architecture Division. Topic: Legacy that lasts. Louise bumped her gently. Told you they'd remember. At the front of the room, a long white linen table was arranged beneath the stage, place cards in silver holders, a bouquet of wildflowers, not lilies, not showy, organic, real, and beside one of the seats, under the soft glow of a spotlight, a polished plaque. Carolyn approached slowly, her name etched into the brushed steel. Below it, the words, in recognition of lasting impact, ethical leadership, and systems that endure. She hadn't written those words. She didn't need to. Gerald stood nearby, his suit as crisp as ever. When she reached him, he held out a glass of sparkling cider. No courtroom, no binders, just applause today, he said, clinking gently against her glass. Unfamiliar territory, Carolyn admitted. You'll get used to it. A few tables away, Dana sat alone. Not in the front, not in the shadows. Somewhere in between. Her blazer was pressed. Her expression, neutral. As Carolyn caught her eye, Dana gave a nod. Carolyn held her gaze for half a second, then turned away. Let history speak for itself. The luncheon progressed in its usual rhythm. Welcome remarks, slideshows of outdated technology, polite chuckles at awkward office party photos. But then the host took the stage. We often measure legacy by what we leave behind, but sometimes it's also about what we correct. He gestured toward Carolyn's table. Today, we honor someone whose work didn't just help shape this company, it helped redefine its integrity. A round of applause built quickly. It wasn't thunderous. It didn't need to be. It was steady, full, honest. Gerald stood and raised his glass again. To Carolyn Hayes, he said, his voice carrying across the room. For building what others took credit for restoring what others tried to erase, and for reminding us that systems run best when truth powers them. Louise leaned in. You cry, and I will cry. Just warning you. Carolyn didn't cry. She stood, lifted her glass, and spoke only one line. Thank you for remembering the work. That was it. No victory speech, no list of what had been stolen. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was respect. An hour later, as the crowd began to thin and people stopped by to shake her hand or leave business cards, Carolyn took one final walk to the back of the room. Near the exit, a small bulletin board displayed plaques of past honorees, most of them men, most of them smiling in portraits mounted under engraved names. Martin's photo was still there, but smaller now. Lower. No longer the centerpiece. Carolyn didn't look at it long. Instead, she turned to the new row at the top. And there, newly installed, was hers. She didn't pose beside it. She didn't take a picture. She simply touched the corner of the frame once, then walked away. Outside, the air was crisp. Autumn had arrived. Real autumn. Not just cooler mornings. She and Louise stepped onto the sidewalk, the sky sharp blue above them. Well, Louise said, tucking her arm through Carolyn's. That's one hell of a rewrite. Carolyn smiled, calm and full. He said I never did anything, she said quietly. Then she looked ahead, smiled wider. So I did the power move instead.